And that was the wrap-up. Uh, Folks, you just cannot imagine how difficult it was for us to get in and out of hotels. So you see, if you were a part of the Beatle entourage, and we five news guys were, uh, it was just incredible. To give you an idea, when I got home from Cleveland, to Cleveland, after the tour, my across the street neighbor was telling me, he said, Art, we had a babysitter the other night. And he said, I was giving her instructions. And I said, now, if you have any trouble, the Schreibers live across the street and here is their number. And he said, she actually started to tremble. She said, who did you say? And he said, the Schreibers, Art Schreiber's across the street. She said, you know Art Schreiber? And he said, yeah, yes, I know him. She said, have you ever shaken hands with Art Schreiber? He said, you know, Art, I didn't know whether I'd ever shaken hands with you or not. She grabbed his hand and said, I just want to hold a hand that has touched Art Schreiber's hand. When I returned from the tour, it was very popular in Cleveland. You know, Shaker Heights was at one time the La Vida Llena of the Northeast Heights. And now Pepper Pike and Gates Mills were coming up to surpass Shaker Heights as the place for rich people to live. So it was very popular, popular at that time for a mother who was having her daughter's 16th birthday to have Art Schreiber come and speak about the Beatles. And of course, when I would pull up in my Rambler station wagon, there was nothing there but Rolls and, you know, and Mercedes, high-end automobiles, and a maid or a butler would usher me to the room where I was to sit, and they had a big overstuffed chair and an ashtray. I smoked in those days, and of course then there was a big fight afterwards for my cigarette butts, as the same as there were for the Beatles. You know, hotels across the country, when we would leave, many hotels cut up the carpeting in little squares, sold them as souvenirs, sold cigarette butts. I'm sure half of them weren't the Beatles, but that was what was gone. When I speak to young women today, and there may be a few in the audience tonight, I tell them, you go home and tell your grandmother I heard her screaming at a Beatle. But you just can't imagine what it was like. Ringo sent my daughter a troll doll. Troll dolls were very popular at that time. He sent my daughter, who was only 9 years old, I think, the biggest gossip columnist of the Cleveland Press, Milt Witter, wonderful guy, good friend, but I didn't tell him about it, but somebody did, and he wrote about Ringo giving my daughter a troll doll. When I was still on the tour, and he wrote this when the tour was going on, my wife, one day I tried to talk to her every day on the phone, no cell phones in those days, you remember. She said, Art, she said, you ought to see our front yard. There are nothing but teenagers, and they want Amy to show them the doll. And she says, I have put the storm door on. This is in August now. She said, I put the storm door on because they're kissing the glass so much. And she says, I'm washing the door every 15, 20 minutes. She said, it's just awful. And she said, I tell Amy, don't, open the door at all. And even when I got back, there were there would be 60 to 70 teenagers in my front yard waiting to talk to me just about the Beatles. The station had to hire Pinkerton guards in those days to get me in and out of the station every day after the tour. In the scrapbook, I picked 2 letters that I saved, and they're in the scrapbook, from mothers who, just to give you an idea, I got hundreds of letters from mothers who were in love with the Beatles and didn't want me to tell their husband or whatever. And you could read in that scrapbook, both those mothers asked me at least one I remember is 72 questions that she wanted me to answer about the Beatles. That was what it was like. One mother was caught in crawling through the ductwork of the Mulebach Hotel in Kansas City trying to reach the Beatles' room. So that was what it was like. I lost 3 suits on the tour, torn from me, mostly the coat, fortunately the pants. And I lost, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 typewriters, portable typewriters that we carried in those days, and a couple of tape recorders. Here is an example. Here they've knocked me down on the ground, the girls, and they've got me on the ground. They're clawing at me and asking what I got in my hand, which is a microphone. Don't watch the street. Don't.
What do you got that in your hand for? What do you got that in your hand for?
I'm.
With the Beatles? Yeah!
Please don't.
Come on.
Why? This is a recorder.
Why? What we're saying?
Yeah, you're being recorded.
Hi! We want Ringo! We want
And we went through that day after day after day. I had to file 15 stories a day. 3 at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 at noon, and 5 in the evening. And you wanted to talk about anything, just what they had for breakfast, what they had for lunch. It was really difficult to find that much to talk about, and we did. But we'd go down in the crowd and get tapes. Well, of course, the moment they found, and somehow they just knew. One day, we're coming out of the hotel in Milwaukee, and there were 3 limos. The first limo carried the Beatles, and if Brian Epstein, their manager, was with them, he wasn't on the tour all the time, but he was in that limo. Then the second limo was their press agent, Eric Taylor, his assistant, the stage manager, and maybe 1 or 2 other persons. And the final limo were the 5 newsmen and 2 photographers. Our limo was crowded. And we would have to fight our way through the crowd to get to the limo. And one day I finally get through, and of course, don't forget, fortunately, we didn't have to carry our bags, our suitcases. That was, taken care of. But we had a tape recorder, a portable typewriter, and a briefcase, and as many newspapers as you could read, And so I'm fighting my way through, and I get in the limo, and I sit down, and my necktie flipped up, and here I felt it, and someone had cut half of it off coming through that crowd. That was what we went through. The kids used to want Paul and want the other Beatles, but Paul was a big favorite, so was Ringo. They wanted them to wave to them. And folks, to this day, I will never know how the kids knew which window was the Beatles, but they did. They somehow figured it out. I don't, to this day, know how, because most of those hotels that we stayed at were large high rises, especially in Chicago, New York, the big cities, and in Dallas we stayed at a motel, and a couple of the other places. But Detroit was a big hotel. Anyway, I asked Paul. I had been down with the crowd, and then I asked Paul when I came back up